RGG nowadays is mostly known for the Yakuza games, which is one they've been slowly and patiently investing in for a decade and a half. A series of criminal melodrama beat 'em ups that, even with its up and downs, it remains as one of gaming's greatest series. And in a field where few can balance humor and drama, RGG has perfected that balance, going above and beyond to prove the raw talent and patience the studio has. But did you know that RGG has made games other than Yakuza? If you didn't, I don't blame you. Only now have they publicly discussed the opportunity of making a new IP, and the idea of them making something other than Yakuza sounds novel. The game in question, of course, is Binary Domain, a game that came during the Japanese games industry dark age, where most big publishers were focused on westernizing their games to appeal to a wider market, given the gradual decline and sporadic difference of sales in Japan compared to the West. This inadvertently gave us an interestingly designed game from RGG, a game that at a glance can be passed off as another Gears of War clone, but when you look under its hood, there's an endearing and passionately built game here, where the game mechanics work in harmony in the most janky and unfathomable ways possible, while the story is serious and ridiculous in every sense of the word. Right off the bat, one of Binary Domain's strongest aspects is the gameplay. Gears clones often struggle to get the fundamentals of what makes the structure click. Gears of War 2 alone had a number of multiple adjustments that fundamentally changed how it played compared to the first game, which turned it into a tighter and responsive experience. Binary Domain on its own manages to not only nail those fundamentals, but it also introduces a few quirks of its own, such as a trust system and commands, not just for general combat scenarios, but for story moments as well, alongside general surprises from time to time. One of those surprises is the number of variables the game has, which is staggering. At the beginning of each chapter, you get to choose the members who accompany you for said chapter's entirety, and this leads into a multitude of different dialogue for every supporting character, as well as for descriptive moments that feel very purposefully built for specific characters, and this also plays in the ending, where the trust system you built affects the outcome. Thankfully, none of that variety feels overwhelming, and it somewhat encourages replayability, even though it does not feature a New Game Plus, which would have perfectly justified subsequent playthroughs unless that does not bother you. Just like in any other game with the same feature, you can make use of commands to tell your teammates when to shoot, cover you, retreat, and the like, and it's very functional, especially in heated situations where they'll react accordingly or when they want to, which is a whole other can of worms. Alongside manual input, you can also use voice commands, but to be honest, I just ignored it and turned it off. It's not a feature I really care for, especially when games with such features have a hard time distinguishing accents. The twist with commands here though is that they're heavily used for story moments as well, and it links back to the trust system. For instance, at random moments or after combat encounters, your crew will often comment on your performance or ask your opinion on something they're curious about, and you make use of commands to reply. It definitely goes the extra step to immerse you and make you care for the characters. But one thing that can make all of this crumble is how binary, no pun intended, some of the choices can be, or rather, the way they're presented. For example, at the beginning of chapter 3, when you go and talk to Faye, she mentions how the place they currently are and the people in there are pretty fancy, and then follows up with,
You're not interested in fashion and things like that, right?
and I'm given two prompts, one that says nope, and one that says yeah. I wanted to say that I'm into fashion and the sort, so I assumed the nope would lead into a negative response, so I went with the option yeah for a positive response.
Not so. I mean, just look at you.
As soon as I make that choice, her trust decreases, and she reacts with disappointment, which made me restart the checkpoint just to see the different outcome.
Oh, is that so? I'd love to see your civvies. I doubt I'd be impressed though.
And there are many other inconsistencies like this throughout the game. The issue in and of itself are not the conversations, but just how simple those prompts do little in communicating the intended response, making it the more baffling that the multiplayer mode has some in-depth prompts that allow you to express with said nuance that the campaign lacks, in turn leading to some upsetting moments. But weirdly enough, such moments make you realize how impressive and just outright ridiculous the trust system is in execution. because during most instances, you'll have occasions where your performance in combat will reflect on your teammates, and they'll often comment how impressed they are if you play well or doubt your abilities as a captain when you play poorly, like I mentioned previously. But generally, it won't heavily dictate their trust in comparison to individual story moments. What is annoying though is how minor AI quirks can affect the trust. At best, they're running towards a crossfire and get mad at you if they cross your line of fire, and at worst, you'll have moments such as Chapter 4, where they push to their absolute limit to the point of affecting your gameplay experience. But thankfully, there's a very strong gameplay loop here that nails on making the experience consistent and always keeping you engaged throughout the whole game. And just like anything Sega, it is pretty arcadey in its design, both in its combat and gameplay variety. Combat, for example, is solid, from controls to overall game feel. There is a mechanical satisfaction in the actions you pull, no matter how simple they are, like running and rolling or shooting, which, speaking of, although floaty at points, weapons feel satisfying to use, and for its time, their sound design is very punchy. And all of this sits in this really neat area where most other Gear clones struggle when they try and translate the formula to their games. My only complaints are weapon switching not being as smooth or quick enough as it could have been, as it can prove detrimental in heated moments. The checkpoint system can be really shoddy at times, and the inability to swap shoulders while shooting, which in hindsight should be a mandatory feature for third-person shooters. I'll be honest and admit that coming into this, I was not expecting much from the story. These types of games usually have the gameplay making up for what is often a fairly boring and forgettable story, and personally, I have the habit of whenever I intend on playing a game, new or old, I'll avoid watching videos or reading on what they are about and how they play, so I can have the freshest experience possible. So, color me surprised when I tell you that the narrative is very engaging, compelling, and generally heartfelt, with a ton of humor, seriousness, and drama. And I'll forever feel ashamed for ever doubting the storytelling capabilities of a studio that literally does mature crime melodramas for a living. Global warming has led to a widespread flooding that made much of the world uninhabitable, and in response, governments have built new cities on top of the old ruined ones as foundations. Unfortunately, said damage has affected a significant number of humans as well, making robots become the brunt of the labor carried out. The American company Bergen controls the majority of the industry, and when a Japanese company named Amada caught wind of its patented technology being infringed, a lawsuit was carried out. They lost, which led to Bergen controlling a bigger chunk than before. Concerned with this, the United Nations led the creation of the new Geneva Conventions, with a very specific clause that prohibits the creation of robots with human-like features to be produced, hollow children as they're called. To maintain the status quo, the IRTA assembles a crew with the purpose of dealing with any breaches of said clause. Years after the treaty, Bergen's headquarters comes under attack. The gunman is neutralized on the spot, but to the shock of many, the suspect contained a disturbing number of mechanical components under its skin, which leads the IRTA to believe that Amada might have been behind this, and it ultimately leads to our main crew to be sent to Japan to investigate the situation and get to the bottom of the incident. If that didn't sparkle or tickle your brain, I don't know what will, because I genuinely admire how engrossing and thought-provoking this premise is. Political narratives in games, especially in AAA space, are somewhat of a rarity nowadays, and generally most avoided due to how controversial, sometimes biased or sensitive some topics are tackled. And no, I'm not talking about someone's sexuality, race, or the color of their hair, which is such a dumb reason to get mad at, by the way. I'm talking about government corruption, political warfare, heck, psyops if we're getting crazy. There's definitely untapped potential in that space, and that unfortunately most big companies won't bother with. Interestingly though, here in Binary Domain, while the majority of the moments derive from the conflicts of the established organizations and how very well fleshed out they are, it never feels tropey or preachy, given how they are presented through the eyes of our characters. A very stereotypical but nonetheless diverse one, I have to admit, in terms of their beliefs and cultural backgrounds. You got the generic white guy, the big black guy, the Asian love interest, the duo Brits who big and bitter, and let's throw a French robot as well because why not? Part of what makes this cast endearing is the fact that even though there is that element of stereotypes not just in the designs but personalities as well, it never falls into any offenses of racist tropes, and as a matter of fact it flips some over its head to really sell the humor, banter, and drama from a very human perspective, and this applies especially to Big Bo, a character that from the outside would have people call him a racist caricature, and I don't blame them. It's easy to make that assumption. But in game he's just a silly goofball, with some of the weirdest choice for VA I've ever seen for a character, but man if it doesn't sell that dissonance quite well. Make no mistake though, as serious as the story takes itself, the majority of your playthrough, it is very lighthearted at its core, which doesn't make it any less enjoyable or serious by the way. The Yakuza games in comparison balance the serious and drama really well because they are rooted in the realism of their subject matter, but with Binary Domain having sci-fi elements, you can see they had enough room to play around with more, which I'm glad they did have the chance to do so. It's not just the characters and their banter that carry the story, but the surprising amount of nuance and social commentary sipped into the writing, which helps it distinguish itself from its contemporaries, resulting in a non-black and white total conflict. You'll have robots and humans working together, hollow children being very aware of their situation and how they maneuver around for their survival or potential demise, the disparity of social classes, one really cool twist towards the end I don't want to spoil, and just the general attitude of balancing what's believable and what's not for the final package we have. Fun fact, this game was developed by the same team that went later on to make Yakuza Like a Dragon, arguably the series' best entry to date, so it's no surprise when you see the parallels in storytelling styles both games embrace. Also, I just gotta point out how Den and Bo sound eerily similar to Nathan Drake and Mike Tyson for no reason whatsoever.
File photo doesn't do her justice. She looks familiar. Reminds me of an actress or someone.
Laura Bailey mimicking an Asian accent.
I am First Lieutenant Fei Li of the People's Liberation Army. My two subordinates were killed by security robots on the way here.
And Troy Baker making his best effort with a British accent.
Oh, luck. Well, that's good. Because we could all do with a bit of luck.
This might not seem that significant to some of you, but I feel like it adds to that corny nature of the dialogue itself. For a game that came out in 2012, released in the same time frame as Yakuza 5, the visuals and attention to detail remains as striking as when it came out. You'll have smaller details like fleshy bits of skin on the androids, filled with gore and blood that can make your skin crawl at points, or the robot's metal plating chipping and breaking away at the contact of your bullets, to bigger ones, like environmental detail being as dense and filled, just like a regular town in a Yakuza game, as well as the machines themselves, bosses in particular, being very intricately designed and sometimes absurd in scale and size. There's also that sense of RGG cinematic flair and style of crafting composition and framing shots the way they do it, which is not surprising if you're a fan of the studio. The music is also varied. At the helm, Idenori Choji leads the charge as sound director, a familiar name for RGG fans, and general composition spreads through a multitude of artists and engineers giving their all for an ass-kicking soundtrack, a great one for its genre as well. Unfortunately though, it suffers from being muffled under the heavy sounds of gunfire and general sound effects. There is some variety in the set pieces though, but at the end of the day, you'll barely pay attention to it if you're really into music, which is a shame. The best two ways to currently play Binary Domain on modern platforms is on a PC or any of the current Xbox consoles, as it is backwards compatible and FPS boosted to run at 60 FPS. I tried on PC and just like with Kane and Lynch, I couldn't be bothered to tinker with the settings and get it to an optimal state. So I stuck with the backwards compatible version on the Xbox, and besides the 720p resolution, I very much enjoy my experience with it, experiencing zero bugs and glitches. I also wanted to try the multiplayer modes, but servers are just about as dead 10 years later. If you have the opportunity, please don't sleep on Binary Domain. It's a very competent and compelling sleeper hit that should be in more people's radar. It has it all really: strong gameplay, a compelling narrative, fun characters, a killer soundtrack, and just in general, an all-around great video game that deserves more eyes glued to it.